Welcome to the Veterans Who Build show. Today's guest, we have a Marine veteran who has amazing stories about building operating bases during his deployment in Iraq. After his service, he went from being broke out of food, out of gas, to now a managing director of construction. I'm really excited for y'all to hear his story, his lessons learned and advice. To our subscribers, thank you for subscribing. To our listeners, a reminder to please subscribe to our channels. It helps so much for that like, for that subscribe and follow, and for even a comment, even if it's just one word on any of our content. A quick shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome George Ashdown. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Welcome to the Veterans Who Build show. George, thanks so much for joining us today, man. What's home base for you?
Pasadena, California.
Awesome, man. Awesome. How's the weather today?
The weather today is great. It's a little cooler than normal. It's been pretty overcast lately, which is great, but I do have construction sites everywhere with like prelim drywall and insulation kind of going in at risk before a roof goes on. So I leave in the morning and I see the weather and it gives me anxiety. Normally,
I mean, fingers
bright,
crossed.
sunny days already.
Right. But it sounds like you're on a good run right now.
A little bit, yeah. It's been dry for the moment. We did have record-setting rain this past winter. It was absolutely insane.
Wow.
But luckily none of my stuff was too impacted.
All right. Happy to hear that, man. Happy to hear that. All right, we'll kick off with a formal introduction. George Ashdown is a Marine Corps veteran, enlisted for 4 years from 2006 to 2010. George was assigned to MWSS 274, the Marine Wing Support Squadron, and deployed to Iraq in 2008. Today, George is the managing director of construction at Elk Development, a husband to a nurse practitioner, and a father of 2 girls. Man, congratulations on being a father of 2 girls. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah, thanks. We're shooting for a third. I'm hoping for a boy, but we'll see what happens, man. Once you have that second girl, you're like, all right, I'm just embrace the girl dad. You know what I mean? Hope for a boy, but embrace the girl dad.
Man, I hear that. That's awesome. That's a serious family you're putting together there. Congratulations, man.
Yeah,
so absolutely. So as our listeners know, and as you know, we like to start off in chronological order. So let's kick off with childhood, where you grew up, and what in your childhood led you to serving.
Sure. I grew up in Southern California here. I'm the second oldest of 6 kids, 5 siblings. And I always grew up wanting to be the Army man. Right. That was me. I was that kid every Halloween, Army man, toy guns, toy soldiers, the whole bit. Right. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my grandpa took me to the El Toro Air Show. El Toro was an air base out here in Southern California that shut down, I think, in like 1997 or 98. I'm not really sure. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, it was our closing air show. My grandpa wanted to take me, so it was just him and I. It was a really special day. Ton of siblings, ton of cousins. So my grandpa took me. And in the parking lot of the air show, there's all these Army men directing traffic, like they do. And I point to one. I said, "Grandpa, I want to be an Army man like that guy." And that Marine snapped his head, points back at me, and barks, like, "Hey, I'm a Marine." And my little 9 or 10-year-old head was just blown, right? I was like, oh my God, he's not an Army guy. That guy's a Marine. Little did I know that the Marines that get assigned to those duties, tend to have done something bad during the week. Like that guy just got a DUI or something. So he's working the parking lot, but I didn't know it at the time. Shaped my entire life around this guy working the parking lot of the El Toro Air Show, So from that point on, Marine Corps, right? That's what I wanted to do. All the way up through middle school, high school, sophomore year of high school, I signed up for the ASVAB, got in touch with my Marine Corps recruiters. They didn't really want to talk to me. I was a freshman or sophomore in high school. They're like, introduce me to your senior friends, let's get these numbers up. But I signed up to take the ASVAB anyway pretty early. I took it during a lunch period. Ended up scoring a 91 or a 92 on the ASVAB. Then the recruiters were like, "Hey, we'll talk to you. That's pretty good. No waivers. That's great." Um, so I did that. My sister took the ASVAB, and my older sister and I both joined the Marine Corps. She joined about 2 years before I did. She ended up being a comms Marine, and then I ended up being an engineer. And it was her and I fight about this all the time, or at least we argue at family events, who was in the Marine Corps first, because she did put her feet on the yellow footprints first, 100%. But I wanted to be a Marine since I was a little kid. You know what I mean? So she says she influences me. I say I influenced her. We'll leave that to our arguments during Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So, before we continue there, what in childhood kind of made you, I don't know, inclined to serve? Was it like family? Was it people around you?
It probably was family more than anything. My dad didn't serve. None of my uncles did. None of my uncles by blood did, but some married in uncles did. I had a couple older cousins join the service, but both my grandparents were in the military. One was in the Army. He was a radio man in Korea. And then I had a grandpa who was in the Navy, also in Korea. And then going back, we've had family in almost every major conflict going back, right? I've heard it said in my family, but I haven't checked myself, that we've been in every major conflict since before the Civil War. And in the Civil War, we fought on both sides.
Wow.
So that's just like interesting history. Except for my dad. My dad did not fight in Desert Storm. What a bum.
Man, I mean that's worth a check though. If you can't find that family lineage back to Civil War, that would be incredible.
I know we've got some old like those metal plate photos of some guys in like Civil War regalia.
Wow.
Like my grandparents had that in their house, so I'd love to get copies of them. Doing this podcast makes me think like, man, I really should organize that family history and put it in a book or something.
Awesome.
For our family.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like there was some just family inherent influence. So that's really interesting. Was anyone in your peer group, like in school, in childhood, enlisting?
Yeah, a ton. I grew up in Marietta, California, went to MWSS, and they have a pretty strong Marine Corps JR OTC program. And so it's really like a high school to the Marine Corps funnel directly. A bunch of kids were joining. And this is still pretty fresh after 9/11, right? Like it was 2001, 9/11. And so I was in high school in 2006, 2002 is when I was in high school. And so it's still very fresh. Still very fresh. A lot of motivation to join, a lot of, pride in being American and joining, and the call to fight, the will to fight, so there was pretty strong sentiment in the high school, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. Cool. So walk us through enlistment. At what age did that happen?
So I enlisted junior year of high school, like as soon as I was a junior, like that summer from sophomore to junior year, I enlisted. And I was going junior to senior year. Yeah, junior to senior year that summer, I enlisted. And so I was in the delayed entry program for almost a full year. And that's just going to the recruiting station once a week, doing like these workouts, going over like basic knowledge, trying to memorize as much as I could. Luckily, I did grow up a Boy Scout. And Boy Scouts does such an incredible job of prepping you for the military. It really does. It's something people don't really talk about, I feel like. I mean, some folks talk about how when you're an Eagle Scout, you become a PFC automatically, which is great. But really like survival knowledge, orienteering, map reading in the dark, survival, tying knots, all those sorts of things become way less stressful. Drill instructor screaming at you for you to learn it. And you're in Camp Pendleton crying at night. You can't read the map. Oh my God, what am I doing? But, if you already know it, you're pretty good. So
right. You're familiar with something rather than it being brand
100%,
new. Right.
100%. Yeah, and shooting. I had a Marine Corps warrant officer teach me shooting in the Marine Corps way. So when you're on the range, way less stressful. Yeah, high school. So junior to senior year, I enlisted, and I was a terrible high schooler. I was terrible. God bless my mom. I wasn't like a criminal or anything, committing like any serious crimes, but I did get myself into trouble, and I'll leave it at that. I actually wasn't supposed to graduate. At my high school, you're supposed to take 2 years of a language, consecutive years of a language. I just didn't do that because why? Mr. Independent over here. And they called me into the office like, hey, we're going to have to keep you. Sorry, you can't graduate. And I was like, guys, I already enlisted. Like, I get that paperwork for you. And they ended up waiving the language requirement so I could enlist and leave. So I have a lot of close encounters like that in my story of becoming who I am, where it's like, it could have gone terribly, but it ended up being fine. Call it luck.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
they
sure.
allowed me to leave and they allowed me to go to boot camp.
Awesome. So walk us through that process. Which boot camp were you at?
I was in San Diego. So San Diego, California, ended up being in what was it? Charlie Company, platoon 1020. I didn't write that down on my notes. I'm just trying to remember. Platoon 1020. Terrible time. I still occasionally have like a boot camp dream, which was crazy. Kind of like when growing up, other people say they have like dreams of like taking a big test. I have dreams that I'm my current age and my current shape needing to go back to boot camp.
Oh man,
it's
that's
like,
tough.
It's a terrible dream, terrible place to be. Wake up all anxiety and hating yourself for not being able to do anything. But when I enlisted as a 1300 option. Right, when you got a 91 or a 92 on the ASVAB, you could do anything. You could sign up for anything. And I really wanted to be an engineer. Remember, I wanted to be in the Marine Corps from the time I was 8 or 9 from the parking lot incident with that guy. And so I had a ton of time to research jobs. I knew a lot about a lot of jobs. I knew about the MOS system, and I really wanted to be a combat engineer. I had dreams of, breaching, explosions, carrying det cord, a crazy dream of me being on top of a building and throwing a landmine over the edge, on top of a crowd of insurgents. That's what was going through my little 17-year-old head, right? And so when I signed up for 1300 option, I thought, of course, I'm going to be a combat engineer. Of course, that's what I want to do. I could have been a water dog. I could have been a maintenance worker. I could have been, a heavy equipment operator, mechanic. It could have done any of those things because you're a 1300 option, whatever the needs of the Marine Corps after that, So we're in boot camp. You're standing at attention at your footlocker, and senior drill instructors reading off everyone's jobs. Ramirez, 0311, whatever. And it gets to me, and it's 1361, engineering assistant. Next cap. I was like, I'm standing at attention. I could just feel the blood leave my face. What did I just do? What mistake did I just commit with my entire life? And it frankly turned out to be the absolute best thing that ever happened to me in my life. It was being at 1361. Wow. It was terrific.
Well, so what's the difference? Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I think you might even be answering this question right now. I was going to ask, what's the difference between that and what you actually wanted?
What I actually wanted was to be, attached to an infantry battalion as an engineer component, to do just that, to do breaching, to do bridge building, to do landmine clearing, to do all those things. Combat engineer work, right? That's what combat engineers do, right? They're like super grunts. They're terrific, At 1361, they do the planning, estimating, and managing of construction. That's what they do, right? So if you were to go build like an LPOP, right? That's semi-permanent listening post, observation post, out in the suck. You're going to build, HESCO. You're going to build these 16 by 32 wood frame huts. You got to grade it, and all that stuff has got to be calced out because trucks have turning radius. Machine guns have ranges of fire, they all have to be interlocking. And so who does that? You get a bunch of 18-year-olds running around with their trucks, they're going to screw it up pretty bad. There has to be a drawn plan and somebody ensuring that plan gets populated with, physical infrastructure. And so that was my job. And so it's engineering assistant is the official title. What you end up being known as when you're working as a DNS guy, drafter and surveyor, right? And I was attached to the wing, so I did expeditionary airfields, I did roads, I did a lot of earthwork stuff. In Iraq, I ended up getting tasked to build LPOP called Rio Lobo outside of the city of Hit. I forget the unit that I got attached with. There was an email that went out saying, hey, we don't have a DNS guy. Does any unit have a DNS guy? And then my warrant officer, who was my platoon commander, said, hey, George, you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, let's fucking go, dude. let's do it. And so I got sent over there to build. As the only time I used my MOS in field, in theater, was that one time to go build that LPOP, and it was terrible. It was miserable. But I got to do my job. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that story. I want to hear about that story. So, back to kind of where we left off. So you got called for, that engineering role. What happens next from there?
Oh, what happens next is you go to infantry school. Well, it's not infantry school. I forget what it's called. The Marine Corps infantry school you go to, it's like 4 weeks long, as opposed to the proper infantry school. It's like 8 or 12 weeks long. But every Marine goes to infantry school in some capacity. Every Marine's a rifleman first, right? So first you learn that, and then you go on to your B school. So I go on to my B school, and I could still barely understand what I'm supposed to be doing, because the time between boot camp to infantry school, then infantry school to B school are like weekends, right? I think I did like a 5-day recruiting duty thing where I Googled my job and I didn't understand it, and I'm mad at my recruiter, like, how come you didn't tell me I couldn't be a combat engineer? And he's like, you signed, you're an adult, which he wasn't wrong. And so,
out of curiosity, do you think now it's a little bit different with, or I'll change how I'm about to word that. If you were 18 now, 17, 18 now, do you think your knowledge would be a little bit different just because of, phones, access to the internet?
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. I could type it in, Reddit, like, what's it like to enlist? What's 1300 option mean? Then you have a bunch of comments like, oh my God, I became a water dog and I hate it. And I've been like, oh my God, maybe. I'm sure access to more information would have impacted my decision making, but I couldn't say for the better, because like I said, that was the best thing that ever happened, was to get assigned that job. The wisdom of the Marine Corps was great that day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was just curious as a thought process, like, just thinking back to my time, similar to yours, that came to mind. Awesome. So you go through your different schools. What were those like in terms of difficulty? Did anything come to mind?
The difficulty in those schools was just how slow they went. Right. When you're in a military school, and when you're a DNS guy, you're combined with, it's not just a Marine Corps school. You're combined with all branches together, learning surveying, learning drafting, learning soils. And then after I graduated from that school, I went to like a 4-week Marine Corps specialty school where we learned the Marine Corps standard equipment. Right. But just the pace of the class was miserably slow, because they're teaching the slowest student. Which when you're combined with Army, Navy, Air Force, the Navy was all right. The Navy was on top of it with their engineer. The Army was okay. But man, it was rough. It was rough to go so slow in the engineering school. So you're learning a lot of patience, just fucking sitting there waiting to drafting. It wasn't like drafting, like here's a picture of something, draft it. It was like, click here, and you click. Then you're waiting for everyone to click. Then you click there, and now you're waiting for everyone to click. It's agonizing.
Yeah.
So that was school, but then in practice, it ended up being great when I graduated and got to my unit.
Awesome. Well, what was like, I guess, through those schools, what was, just tell us a little bit of the core concept that you were learning.
So we had a portion on drafting, and it was just that. It was learning AutoCAD. That's all it was. Learning AutoCAD. I think it was like AutoCAD 2004 or 2006. I forget which AutoCAD it was. To just learn AutoCAD. It was like your first block. Your next block was earthwork, and it was learning surveying. You had some surveying equipment, and then you would plug that into software that would do earthwork volume reports and terrain mapping and things, learning how to use that. That was fine. And then after that block, everyone went to their separate schools. Army continues on to like a soils specialty school where they learn soils. Air Force goes to a like satellite mapping portion of school. Navy, I'm not sure what they do. And then the Marine Corps, we just did more surveying with the Marine Corps specific surveying equipment, which is really top of the line equipment, at least at the time I was there. It was, they didn't use Jotometer at the time. Trimble bought Jotometer. It was all Trimble equipment using like, remote total stations. It was really top of the line surveying.
Awesome. That's awesome. So
but then I had actually the exact same experience. The exact same experience I had in boot camp, I had out of school, because I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to get with, an engineer battalion that will be attached to, an infantry unit, and I'm just going to be doing combat engineering stuff. And all the teachers said the same thing. All right, guys, if you're hating this, don't worry. You're not going to do your job in the Marine Corps. You'll probably be assigned to combat engineers, and you're just going to do what they do, but you'll be able to do AutoCAD in the evenings. And I was like, great, sounds good. And then they tell you what base you've been assigned to, and I got assigned to MWSS 274. I was swinging with the wing, and I was infuriated again because I was like, guys, I joined to deploy. I joined the Marine Corps knowing I wanted to go to the desert. I wanted to do my job. I wanted to be an engineer. And instead, I don't become a combat engineer. I became a soft 1361 drafter and surveyor. And then I got sent to the wing, and I was like, this is the opposite of exactly what I wanted. I'm like the pogiest pogue who's ever pogued. You know what I mean? And I was so upset. But again, it ended up being great because it afforded me a ton of latitude, right? Because the wing, yes, they're not as hard charging. They're not. But I was able to focus on my job, which was drafting and surveying. I was doing earthwork for airfields all the time, doing temporary airfields all the time. And I was able to dive into it and really challenge myself in problem solving. And by virtue of my job, when you're doing the drawing of a project, and you're doing the earthwork volume reports, and you're doing the estimating, and you're doing the planning of how to get it done, you end up, by virtue of that being your job, you work with the officers in charge of, ordering all the equipment and putting together proposals to submit to command to make a project happen. We work with the civilian contractors that we consult with, or the Marine Corps consults with, to deal with code issues and, water treatment and whatever. And then hire enlisted officers to talk about hire enlisted non-commissioned officers to talk about what's the manpower going to be of flies, how much water do we need, where can we camp when we build this project. And so I got very used to needing to be very confident with people that were all of greater power than, which was invaluable experience.
Yeah, man, that's pretty amazing. And if you think about it, you were really the core of all of those projects, right? Because your work is what sets off how whatever it is that's getting built moves forward. So that's a pretty amazing spot to be in.
100%. And I hated it like the entire time. It's in retrospect that I can appreciate it. At the time, I'm like, why am I doing this? I should be in Iraq with jet corps. I was so mad.
I mean,
but it was all for the best.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of things are obviously like that, right? In hindsight, it's easier to pick apart,
100%.
The positives and such. Well, explain to us what the MWSS kind of mission set is for those that don't know in general.
Yeah, so a Marine Wing Support Squadron does exactly that. They support the Marine Wing, right? So 274 supported as the 2nd Marine Air Wing. 274, I think the MWSSs have actually been collapsed with another unit type. The MWSS is now dead, I think, or at least 274 is. It no longer exists. And so the wing needs airfields. They need weather stations. They need, crash fire rescue. They need fuel. They need all sorts of stuff to make the wing operate. And so when you're with the Marine Wing Support Squadron, you do exactly that. You provide that support. And so as an engineer to the MWSS, if they needed a building built, runway repaired, runway built, whatever, you're the guy who's doing it.
Awesome. So it sounds like next step to move on to in your story is that deployment.
Yeah, so we gear up for the deployment. We do a bunch of workups. We deploy, and I barely did any engineering. I deployed Al Assad in 2008, Al Assad Air Base, and my unit rotated between, it was like a week in the towers. We did like 12-hour shifts in the perimeter towers. And then we did a week in the QRF, which is the quick reaction force to the base. If anything happened in the AO, the base, the area of operations of the base, you had to deploy out and deal with it. And then it was a week in the wide area patrols. So you'd get in a truck and you just drive for 16 hours around, just patrolling open desert, setting up little checkpoints for folks. There was a little city outside of the base called al-Baghdadi, I believe it was called. So occasionally going through the city there, but nothing too crazy. It was just dealing with that. Occasionally there was some bomb that blows up somewhere. I was never hit. Thankfully, my squad, my truck platoon never got hit, which was great, but some did. Got really lucky in that sense. Of course, I'm sitting there bitter, like I should be in Ramadi right now, but at the time you're just there, you're dealing with it,
Right.
And so I was the kind of guy that couldn't sit still. I was always going to different schools, getting different kind of qualifications. So I ended up with all these different truck licenses. So I was driving Humvees a lot of the time, when we were out there, up until I got that request to go build that LPOP. I believe it was called Rio Lobo. Yeah. I forget.
So that request happened.
What unit that was with.
Got it. Yeah. So that request happened while you were deployed.
Yeah. While we're overseas,
awesome.
My platoon commander, warrant officer, he got an email looking for drafters and surveyors. We don't have any. We got to build this thing. I met with that command, and we went over, okay, what tools do you have? What kind of personnel do you have? What are you trying to build and why? And then we sketched out, on some satellite photos, exactly what they were trying to do, how much material we needed to do it. And we packed it all up. We went out there and we did it. And it was a crazy experience because they didn't have any tools. They didn't have any survey equipment, and my unit didn't bring any survey equipment because we were there for area security.
Right.
We didn't bring any of my gear, so I ended up just using geometry to lay this thing out. I ended up building with some straight edges and a compass, a big 90-degree angle on one corner of this base that we had to lay out, and then everything I built was an offset of that, using stacks of rocks and IR glow sticks, because the equipment could only run at night. There were some snipers around because what the Marine Corps does is if there's bad trouble, you build a base in the middle of it, right? If there's an area getting hot, you just erect a flag in the center of it, right? And so, occasionally there was fire and these guys would set up. I would be putting up little stacks of rocks to say the corner of this hut goes here, the other corner of this hut goes here, 16 by 20. I need truck beds here, so I need compaction ratios of dirt of this much. Here, the HESCO barriers, I need those to be this far and this wide, and a 6x6 with a 4x4 on top. And they were kind of light. They were like an armored vehicle unit. I forget all the nomenclatures of these units. I apologize to you and your listeners.
Right.
So to reinforce their QRF, we built truck ramps around the exterior fence so that if they geared up in their trucks, they could drive adjacent to the HESCO up on a ramp, and then their gun can have a little bit of articulation over the HESCO. Right. So we did that for additional protection around the outside. Super great. Their guys loved it, But I would have to go lay out all these rocks in the middle of the day, and it's like 115 degrees. My dumbass is out there with my helmet, I'm smoking, and I've got my vest on, laying it all out with tape, and the tape gets a lot longer the longer you work in the heat, right?
Yeah.
So you're off by a couple inches as you go, the longer you stretch the tape, because it's all steel tape. And a couple inches on an angle means that you can build an entire base like crooked. So trying to take all those things into consideration, subtracting, it was a whole thing.
Wow.
So we're doing that during the day, and the machine operators would come out at night because the machines could only operate at night. It got too hot, and you didn't want them to get shot at. But then they couldn't see my rock stacks. So I'd be laying it out during the day, and I would nap for a little bit in dusk. And then when they started working at night, I have to go back out there. And this was the scary part. You don't want to be the guy out there pointing at things, holding the paper. And of course, that was me. I'm out there holding this thing, pointing. This thing goes here, that thing goes there. Throwing rocks at machines when they roll over, like my stakes, which were just piles of rocks, So we got that thing built in about a week and a half, got sent back to my unit.
Wow.
And that was that.
Man, that's a pretty unbelievable story. Did the guys you were working with over there, did they realize like what you were doing with the lack of equipment that you didn't have?
They didn't. Their platoon commander did.
Okay.
But we're out there with like Iraqi police, and they're just like staring at us, and like their equipment operators, like, so the stacks of rocks are the building corners. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, whatever. You got to remember, everyone's 18.
Right.
Everyone's 18. Everyone's 19. Platoon commander's 21. So it's just a bunch of dudes. It's just a bunch of dudes ripping it.
Right. That's amazing. I can imagine, someone who has like just no concept of just engineering, construction, anything in that nature whatsoever, just looking at you and like, thinking, wow, this just can't be how things are built. Like what the hell is going on here? Obviously them not
You do
knowing.
have this idea that the Marine Corps is going to be like locked in.
Right.
Everything's going to be so well organized, and it's going to be, snap and pop and built. No, everyone's just making it up for the first time as they go, and it's insane. It's absolute insanity. And all of your equipment operators, we rely on the equipment operators, right?
Mhm.
They're like the bread and butter of anything we build, or the heavy equipment boys, right? None of them have a lick of experience. They've all been operating equipment for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So they're all
Yeah.
really bad at it because it's their first time doing it. So we
Mhm.
got a bunch of dinguses trying to build stuff, you know.
That yeah, I love that story. That's amazing. How is the outcome of what you guys are building?
Great. Got it all built. It was
Hell yeah.
fully up. It was operational. There was like some MEP guys trying to connect the temporary utilities we set up to make it more permanent, or at least semi-permanent. And when they were doing that, my job was done. I took the next like convoy back to Al Hassan.
And this was also you by yourself, right? I mean, you left your team to go,
It
volunteer
was
and do this.
me and one other guy who did not want to be there
Okay.
because my platoon commander was like, "All right, you grab another guy," and I was like, "All right, Siders, you want to do this?" He's like, "No," and I'm like, "Well, fuck it, we're doing it." And he was like, "Oh gosh." And so me and a reluctant comrade of mine were out there trying to figure it out. I
that's
was the
that's
corporal, he was the lance corporal, and that's just the way it rolls, baby.
yeah. Oh man, that's an awesome story. Did you get any pictures of the end result of that?
End result, no. I got some of
Damn.
the
Damn.
during, of course,
Okay.
but none of the like doing inspections of the HESCO,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't want to walk and climb and go around because it's a pretty large thing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
scorching hot. So we ended up, OSHA, turn off the mics, OSHA. But we ended up being in like a bucket, and we're
Mm-hmm.
both standing in the bucket, holding onto the teeth of the bucket while it drives, and we're observing the HESCO to make sure it's all filled properly, right? Because it could deform and stuff and create spaces for bad guys to hide. And so we're just inspecting the HESCO riding inside of like the bucket of a machine. So I got pictures of that.
I mean,
My
that's pretty
pictures are all
awesome.
terrible. I always kept one grenade pouch open with my like point and shoot camera in it,
Hmm.
just to snap random things.
Yeah. That love the story, man. That's awesome that you did that. I hope that somebody appreciated it when they were there, especially the team that was using that base. Awesome, man. So you get back to your team. What happens next?
Nothing. Just get back to work. It's like, all
Hmm.
right, where's my platoon? It's like, oh, they're on towers, or I don't even remember what they were on, but you just join them doing whatever they
Hmm.
were doing. You know, back in towers, or doing the long drives, or doing QRF.
Hmm. And yeah, all right. So I'm guessing that goes until the end of that deployment.
Till the end of the deployment, you got your relief coming in. You do your
Hmm.
75-25s, 50-50s, 75-25s, and then you're done. Then you fly to Kuwait, sit in Kuwait for a couple of days, and you come home.
Hmm. How long was that deployment, just generally speaking?
It was normal deployments for the Marine Corps about 7 months, right? Seven
Hmm.
months on, 14 off. But this one ended up being like 9 months for whatever reason. It's like we went
Hmm.
there early, we came home a little late. I don't know why. It was like 9 or 10 months.
Hmm. Yeah, got it. Awesome. Awesome. So you get back home. Where does that land, like in terms of your overall service when you get back from that deployment?
I didn't have enough for my next deployment. Because at that point, 2008, I was more than halfway done. At the very end of 2008, rolling into 2009, I was getting out in a year and a half,
Hmm.
right as the unit was going to deploy again. And I wanted to deploy again. First, I wanted to see if I can transfer units to like a more combat forward unit. I got told no, because the problem with being a 1361 is the MOS is so small. There's so few
Hmm.
Marines that are 1361s. At the time I was in, when the Marine Corps was huge, there was only about 120 or 115 guys
Wow.
in my MOS. So
Hmm.
when you log on to Marine Online, you can see the list of everyone in your MOS, and ours was short, and you know everybody. It's like, oh, that was my instructor here. That was the guy I worked with over here. This is a guy that requested a file here, and here's the guys in my unit. So you can kind of see everybody. So you're just waiting for guys to get out, or retire or whatever in front of you, so everyone can kind of promote up. But because of that, you can't move around very easily. You just can't, because needs of the Marine Corps. You need to be with MWSS. You need to maintain runways, and that's that. So I couldn't do that. So for me to join the next deployment, I would have had to extend my contract by 2 years. That's like the only option, either 2 years or 4 years, or that's it. And so I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to get out and go to school. After all my experiences, I thought I really enjoyed design. I thought I enjoyed design. But I really enjoyed project management. I thought it was more design that I was attracted to. What I really liked was decision making, right? But apart from that, so I thought, okay, I want to do that in my professional life. I would like to be what I thought would be an architect. I'd like to be an architect. How do I do that? So I wanted to get out and go to school. So if I could have extended my contract by 6 months, I would have done it. But that just wasn't an option.
So how do you close out that last year plus minus?
So I actually talked to my platoon lieutenant, and I let him know, like, hey, I want to go to college when I'm out. I actually thought a lot about transition. I spent like the last year and a half just thinking about transition and what to do. I knew I wanted to be an architect, or at least that was in my head. And I knew I was also a terrible student in high school. No one's going to accept these transcripts. They didn't even qualify to graduate the first time. What are you doing? I can't go to school. So I thought, oh shit, I got to be a transfer student. That's what I can do, right? All this is on Google. I'm just Googling what to do. And I actually started calling architects. I was in Cherry Point, North Carolina. I started calling like local architects, like, hey, how do you become an architect? What's that all about? And I get one guy. I wish I could remember this guy's name or his firm name, but this guy takes my call and talks to me for like an hour.
Wow.
And explains like the qualifying process and what kind of degree to get. Because I didn't realize, but there's a Bachelor of Arts of Architecture. There's a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, and there's a Bachelor's of Architecture. That's a 5-year professional degree as opposed to the 4-year undergrad. And I totally would have messed that up if I wasn't talking to this one guy, And so I kind of look into it. I look into schools I can go to. I didn't trust myself at all at a big school. I thought, man, you're going to be partying again. You're going to be chasing chicks around. You're going to fail out. You've got to control yourself. How can we control ourselves? Let's go to a small school. Let's go to a tiny school with no life, like no social life. That's what I did. Is I ended up picking. I filtered down to Southern California schools with tiny student bodies with bachelors of architecture, 5-year program, and ended up finding this school called Woodbury in Burbank. There's a satellite school in San Diego. But look into their admission requirements. How do I get into these schools, right? Because there's in Southern California, there's SciArc, there's New School of Architecture, there's Woodbury, and of course there's like USC's got a program, UCLA has a program. Those are 4-year programs, I think. USC's might be 5-year. But looking at what requirements they've got, it's like, okay, clearly I need to go to community college or something to be a transfer student because I don't want to go take my SATs, don't want to do my ACTs. At this point, 4 years removed from school, I'm like terrified of math. I don't want to be doing that. So let's be a transfer student. So I approached, my platoon lieutenant with all this information. Here's what I want to do. Here's how I want to do it. Can you help me achieve this? And he was awesome. He's like, yeah, man, let's make a plan. And when I ended up he helped me out pick schools because I was going to pick, like, when you go to the Career Center on base, it's actually terrible. There's like all these strange, predatory, for-profit universities at these education centers, and I thought these schools just don't feel right. It doesn't feel like a real university. I don't know if this stuff's going to transfer. I didn't know much about it. So I thought, let me just drive off base to the nearest community college. Where's that? Because I know that stuff transfers. So I ended up doing that, and I take like 2 classes a semester for the rest of the time I'm in. And I ended up getting like straight A's in community college because I just forced myself to do well. And during workups for that next deployment, my platoon lieutenant was like, hey, we know that's going to mess up your schooling, but let's see what we can do to put you in the armory. Would you be all right working the armory, being transferred there? We'll just collect and issue out weapons, but when we're on a workup, there's no one, you just open the armory and sit there. It's kind of a shit job. And I was like, yeah, I would love that shit job because I can sit there and like do homework.
Right.
So it was a major hookup. I ended up doing that, giving everyone their weapons. They take off to do the workups, and I would open their armory in the morning in case it was a range day or something, or close it in the afternoon and go to school.
Man, that's pretty amazing that you realize, and I'm curious if you kind of even know how you came around to this mindset of starting to, just recognize what's going to happen next, like preparing for transition, as as you mentioned. Do you remember at all, like how you came around to realizing that that would be important to do?
Not really. I
Hmm.
was never a great planner. Now I'm a terrific planner. That's all I do. But I think there was, if I had to pinpoint one moment in the Marine Corps that led me to think I need to get on it and I need to figure this out,
Hmm.
was, when we were doing the wide area operation, like, just driving trucks around. We set up this post, waiting to stop anyone going through this wadi, like this big canyon. Stop folks from going through the wadi, check their IDs, shake them down, see what's going on, because we had reports that were trafficking weapons through wadis. And so I'm sitting behind a 50 cal in this wadi, just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. It's like 8 hours of just fucking sitting there, right? And I remember just looking at the rocks that were surrounding me, and it was like, this like slab of stone with all these veins in the rock, all the veins. And I'm thinking, okay, my life in a geological time scale, what would that be? How thick would my vein be in this rock? And then it's like, well, you wouldn't. You wouldn't even be a grain of sand. You'd be a speck on the back of a grain of sand. And it kind of hits you like, man, what the fuck am I doing? What am I doing? Like, my life is so insignificant in a geological time scale that I'm surrounded by. What am I going to do with my time? You got to figure this out, man, because you're going to end up bumping around. We also had an injection in our unit of a bunch of recalls, right? At the time, the Marine Corps was really hungry for bodies. So there were guys that had gotten out, but their inactive service time wasn't up. And so they got called back into active duty and they had to join our unit. And those guys, man, they came from all walks of life. Some guys doing really well, some guys doing bad, but they all talked about like, hey, take as much, seize your opportunities, guys. Like when you get out, it's crazy. It's all on you when you get out. So you got to figure it out, which is really motivating for me to try to sort my life out outside of the Marine Corps. The entire time you're in, you're kind of scared of getting out. You're terrified of getting out because everyone you're dealing with left and came right back. Right. The only guys that have civilian life experience was like some staff sergeant who left for 6 months, got divorced, and came back. He's like, I came back to the Marine Corps. Civilian life is terrible. It's garbage. Everybody sucks. And you're like, dang, I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll make a career in the Marine Corps. Then you get these recalls, and they're like, no, it's amazing. Your fate's in your hands. Go make it happen. And so that's if I had to pinpoint the moment, it was a combination of dealing with all the recalls and their stories, but also just taking that moment in the wadi, sweating in your Kevlar, looking at rocks, thinking, man, my life is nothing in the overall scheme of time. What am I going to do with the time I have?
Yeah.
You got to figure it out.
That's really cool that, one, it's an awesome story. I love that concept and that thought process today for anyone at any, position in life. But it's also really cool that I guess in that moment and at that age, you were able to recognize and think of, such magnitude of life and time and scale, and then apply it to that rock you're looking at. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Well, it was about time because, like I said, I was terrible in high school, and I never got NJP'd, thank God. But there were a couple of times I could have ruined my career if I was caught, just doing the wrong things. So at that point, it was all straight shooting.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, so it sounds like you're closing out service, basically just opening, closing the armory, studying for school. What happens in terms of, finishing your enlistment?
It's just that you go to SEPs and TAPs. They have you do a bunch of horrendous exercises. I get why they do it, but they have you do all these, like, let's pretend we're in a job interview, stuff like that. Let's write a resume. All that stuff is fine. But I had already been accepted to school at that point, got accepted to a couple schools. So I decided on Woodbury because it was small, the LA campus, the San Diego campus, and I really wanted to be in San Diego. So I was just looking forward to getting out, going to school. I was so excited.
Oh, so you had, before you finished your enlistment, you had applied for that transfer?
Yep, I had applied.
Awesome.
I had applied to the schools. They accepted me as a transfer student. yeah, I had like my scheduled time to show up for registration and get, set up for classes, and then I packed my truck up, I drove off base, I waved, and I took off to drive across country to go back to California.
Wow, nice, man. That's awesome. So talk to us about the experience, and it doesn't have to be, literal to the day, week, month. It could be, stretched over even a year plus. Talk to us about that experience in transitioning military to civilian.
It was way more stressful than I could have imagined it was. I thought I had myself all gassed up, like, man, I'm gonna crush it. I'm gonna crush it. I'm really getting it figured out, and life isn't that hard. I'm gonna crush this. And then you get out and you're like, man, I've got like 2 sets of civilian clothes, and I gotta put on different clothes every day. And I don't know, it's like you gotta build everything back up, and it's strange how much that even today, when my parents, of course, were super happy to have me home for the first week, for the first month. The second month is like, okay, when are you moving? By the third month, before school started, they're like, can you please leave? Things were so much nicer before you were here. Because, I was a corporal in the Marine Corps. They like mailed me sergeant. I picked up sergeant like right as I was getting out, and I was super bitter about that. Right?
Yeah.
But hard charging corporal, you're used to having like little patience and issuing orders and knife handing people and things. So I'm doing that with my siblings. What are you doing? This house is a mess. You fucking, So my parents, that got really old really fast. But either way, I get the Jet.Build to cover school. That's great. It comes with BAH. That's great. But I had another one of these like revelation moments where I was out of money. BAH ran out. There's gonna be like 10 days or something near the end of the month for BAH to refill. And I was hungry, and I was also out of food. That's a bad combination.
Bad combo.
Because no one gives a shit if you eat except you. You're the only person on the planet who cares if you eat, and there's no chow hall. There's no buddy of yours that will, buy you an energy drink in the morning, if you're missing your wallet. None of that. I'm just by myself in San Diego. And I'm like, it was like, oh my God, this is scary. That's the first time I was scared of civilian life. So I was sitting in an apartment with no food and no money. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to fucking figure this out? And so it was the next morning. My truck was also out of gas. So it's like the light was on. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't fast for 10 days. So my dad was working in the area at the time. So I actually call him and I'm like, hey, I'm out of money and gas. Can you fill my truck up? And he's like, man, you got to figure it out, kid. Like all the time in the Marine Corps, you have no discipline. What's this all about? I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I meet him at a gas station, fills up my car. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I go inside and get a snack? Can I borrow your gas card? And he's like, yeah, no problem. I go inside and I get like a shopping bag and I put it full of like instant noodles and like cans of stuff like they had gotten in gas stations. And I come out and he's like, what are you doing? What you said a snack? What is that? And I was like, oh, I gotta come clean, Dad. I'm fucking broke, dude. And I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. He kind of slaps him in the back of the head. I was like, man, you gotta figure this out. Let's go to Ralph's. And that is the last time my parents helped me out because we went to Ralph's, we got some groceries, and never again. I thought, never again. This is too embarrassing, right? But that was definitely, the most scared I've ever been as a civilian was sitting there with no money and no food and thinking like, what am I supposed to do with this? Luckily, my dad was in San Diego the next day because they're up in Murrieta. They just happened to be in San Diego.
And that you brought up a lot of they could otherwise seem like insignificant things, and then you obviously roll it into being out of money, not having food, not having gas, etc. So it got more significant. But starting on those smaller things like who's cleaning up after you, who's providing, who's cooking the food, who's just organizing life, generally speaking. These are things that you don't really realize until they smack you in the face. Per your story there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. What was your plan once that happened? Like, how'd you get out of that?
Well, my first plan was, okay, I got to get a job, obviously, because I got BAH that covers rent and then some living after that. But I got to budget a lot better, and I need to get a job. Every job I could have found like really conflicted with school, because in architecture school you have studio and studio hours, and those they take a very long time. You're doing all-nighters in school when you're trying to make these presentations, put them together. And so I ended up just taking out student loans, unfortunately, on top of my GI Bill, and that ended up, supporting my life through most of school. I did have jobs later in school as an RA. I worked at the gym on campus because I was in San Diego my first year. But then after that, I ended up transferring up to the Los Angeles campus because I ended up reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? And that book just blew me away. My parents weren't good with money. They didn't have a lot of money themselves. That's why when I first got hungry with no money, I didn't call my parents right away because they are also broke. They're probably also hungry with no money. You know what I mean? Like there's, that gas card was my dad's company gas card. They themselves didn't have a ton of cash. But so reading Rich Dad Poor Dad and learning about like financial independence and how to build assets and what is an asset, learning how to make money through what you own as opposed to working to get money paid for your time. Super interesting concepts I didn't really think about. You kind of knew of, but you didn't really know. You didn't really think about.
Right.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to go study in the LA campus because the LA campus also has a business program. Woodbury is most known for the business program, not the architecture program. And so the San Diego campus was architecture exclusively. So I thought, okay, I'll transfer to Los Angeles. So I ended up moving to LA, and that's where I was the RA and worked in the gym on the main campus and all that. I ended up taking a ton of business courses while I was doing my architecture degree. But
awesome. Yeah. I'm gonna put a footnote on that book. That sounds awesome. I like how you said you know of, but you don't actually know. It's like you know the concept of assets making money, etc. But doesn't mean that you know how to literally do that, right? Literally produce that.
When you're a kid growing up, it also feels impossible. Like when you're a kid who grew up without a ton of money and your parents aren't asset holding people, all rich people have real estate, right? All rich people own real estate, basically. But you don't know why. It feels impossible. Buying a house is hard enough for you to buy a house. I grew up in a family where you rented most of the time, so to buy a house and then buy another house, well, you might as well go to Mars, bro. Like that's crazy. People do it, but you don't know how or why, until you study it and you realize like, oh, if I plan well and execute, you could really make this happen.
Yeah, totally. So, I guess it sounds like you're finishing out your architecture degree in Los Angeles. What happens from there?
Well, I've been very lucky in my life to always find a good mentor. I've always been very lucky to find good mentors. When I was in the Marine Corps, I had like that platoon commander who was like, "Hey, let me help you get to college. Right? Put you in the armory. Let's figure this out." When I was in college, I had my the head of student life, a gentleman named Marco. He took me under his wing with like resident life and helped me become an RA. And I was able to do that for a couple of years. Took that cost of housing off my back, so my BAH just went to living and saving, so I didn't have to take on additional student loan burden. And also, while I was in school, I ended up interning at the Air Lands Institute at Woodbury, which is like a kind of like a water climate institute, right? Like doing research and whatnot on water and climate and drought. Sorry, I'm searching for the word drought. And so with their help, I took classes with them. Peter and Hadley Arnold, amazing people. Peter and Hadley Arnold, they're incredible. Took classes with them. I interned with them over 2 summers, did some projects with them, and then they knew folks in the working architecture world. So they gave me a great reference to an architecture firm, AC Martin. I interviewed with them while I was a senior and actually got hired on to transition to part-time while I was finishing my degree and then convert to full-time as soon as I graduated.
Amazing.
So I found my job for like my post-degree life while I was still in school, which was a massive relief. Yeah. People are applying while they're trying to do their finals, and it's very stressful. And I was like, oh man, I've got my job.
Massive relief.
It was a good job. AC Martin is a terrific architecture firm in Los Angeles. They built or they at least designed and administrated the majority of the towers downtown Los Angeles. They're really the premier tower builder in LA. The tallest building in LA now, Wilshire Grand Tower, was designed and administrated by AC Martin. So it's terrific to be in that environment, learning how big buildings get built.
Man, I want to make a call out because you mentioned, being lucky in life and having kind of these opportunities. However, just hearing what you've done in your story at the same time, granted, luck will always have a force, a play in everything, right? But you also, took action throughout all of these stages, right? I mean, you talked to your platoon leader trying to get into college. You started college, even though you weren't a studious person growing up. You went through college, right? You moved to Los Angeles where you could find yourself in a better situation. You got involved with, working while in school, doing that internship, which led to your degree. So I just want to give you credit in terms of, that roadmap where you really just put yourself out there and you made effort, which resulted in that architecture job post degree.
Thanks. You make me blush.
Yeah.
I've always been very good as an adult. I feel like making a plan, just saying, okay, here's the steps I believe will get me to my goal, and then you just relentlessly execute.
Yeah.
Be flexible in the way you execute, but you execute. And I think that anyone who's a mentor or has they don't consider themselves a mentor, but they do help guide you. There's a lot of folks that are hungry for mentees if they're open and earnest and hardworking. And I know that now because now I try to mentor folks. And if anyone shows sign of hey, can you help me with this? And I genuinely want to improve, I'm all over it. I want to help that guy.
Yeah.
And so I think I just had a shamelessness about asking for help. I want to do this and I don't know how. You seem like you know what you're doing. Can you help?
Yeah.
And there's always someone saying, yeah, I'm more willing to help you, guy. So I think I just gravitated towards those folks that were willing to offer help, but I always try to offer something in return. Like either being a good Marine or working for you in your institute or being your employee, a good employee.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, before we continue in your professional career, in terms of what's next with this architecture firm, I want to just give a quick plug on, could be one, could be a few things that come to mind in terms of that transition period and just specific advice that you would give, your former self, aka anyone in that kind of space in that position right now.
I would say I know I'm kind of you asked for book recommendations kind of near the end, but before I read Extreme Ownership, kind of just had that mindset of just owning whatever's happening. Right. If something's happening, it's because you did it. Right. If it's good, you did it. If it's bad, you did it. And so the plan, if I'm going to hit that end goal, I have to do it. Right. Because growing up, even in the Marine Corps, even when I was first in school, I kind of had this idea of oh, I'll make it. I'll get rich and I'll make it. But then it's well, what's your plan, man? How are you going to do that? Because then you start doing math in your head. I went to school at 22. It's a 5-year program. I graduated at 27. If you want kids before you're, 45, you got to find that girl. You got to marry her. And how are you going to support her? And what does that school look like? If you want to do private school, you got to pay for that. Now you're working backwards from a timeline of I'm late. I need to be making money today. What's my plan for doing that today? If not, what's my plan to get to a place where I'm going to be making money or I'm responsible for X or Y, right? And so I think just that idea of extreme ownership, of owning that plan, owning your goals, executing relentlessly, you can get there. And if you don't get there, you're going to get a lot closer than you would have if you just sat there dreaming about it, waiting for it to happen,
Absolutely, man. Yeah, well said. That's one of my favorite books. So I'm happy that you said that. Great examples. Totally with you there. All right, so moving forward, you start with that architecture firm in LA. What happens next?
I hated it. It was terrible. It was a miserable time. It really was. And I loved the idea of architecture. Okay. I loved it. I loved the idea of the firm. I loved going to parties with my girlfriend, now wife, and telling her friends, I'm a designer at an architecture firm, it's like a sexy, sleek. Yeah, I'm working on the Wilshire Grand. I'm working on some of the interior work there. It's, it's all right. We're working on some other towers in Hollywood, Palladium towers. It's going all right. But then I'm making $26, $27 an hour to do it. And what working on those towers means is grinding an AutoCAD is what it means. It's sitting at your computer and fucking 3D modeling and updating models, and my Revit families aren't meshing and now they're corrupt and I've got to redo this portion of the model. it was soul crushing, to say the least. You just fear sitting in that office. And not to say that architecture is bad. It's just, for me, that was my experience. Right. I know a ton of fantastic architects that are the greatest people in the world to work with. But for me, it got to be just chained to a desk working on things. I've been so active my entire life, and then suddenly I'm in an office. And then one day there was a vote in Los Angeles to put a moratorium on new housing. Okay, that means that they were voting to stop housing production in Los Angeles for whatever reason. And I was working on 2 towers for like a year and a half, 2 years. The Palladium towers. I would have gone around Palladium with an awesome developer, by the way, a really cool set of guys. And they put the project on pause because they want to see how the moratorium shakes out. If the moratorium passes, they're not going to keep the project going. And if it doesn't pass, they'll pick it up after that, right? So that work pauses, and I watch the last year and a half, 2 years of my life of work get clicked and dragged into an archive folder on the server.
That's brutal.
Oh, God. I was ready for it. I'm going to re-enlist. Get me out of here.
Exactly.
This is terrible. So at that time I started thinking, all right, I love the developers that I'm working with. These guys are awesome. I was in a fraternity in college, Delta Sigma Phi. Shout out to those guys. Excellent group of guys. And the guys on the development side of the table were just like the bros I was with in college. Right? Same temperament, same personalities, and the way they were just making decisions was reminiscent to the way I would make decisions in the Marine Corps and how much I loved that. They're like, oh, that bathroom shape doesn't work. Let's move it this way, move it that way, change that window. And that I would be the CAD monkey changing it like this. And they're like, yeah, that looks good. And then it was so dynamic, and the way they were so free to make decisions while I executed. Right? I want to be on that side of the table. I want to be making the decisions because I feel I'm competent enough to make those decisions that are best for work, right? And so I was looking at jobs in development, real estate development. Again, I didn't know a ton about it apart from Rich Dad Poor Dad at that point. I'm thinking like single family home. I didn't know anything about multifamily. It seemed so scary, another big hill to climb. On the team of guys, though, they had a construction expert, and him and I talked the same language because I came from the building background in the service. So I ended up finding a job with a group called AMJ Construction Management. They're a construction management firm that had no qualms taking a roll on the dice on a guy from a design background to manage construction projects, probably because of the military background. And those guys were, again, excellent. Great mentorship with the head of that office, a guy named Jack Wickersham, who's really like Los Angeles industry expert in multifamily, in particular affordable multifamily. But he's done everything. He's done heavy industrial, he's done commercial, he's done multifamily, and he's kind of ending his career with affordable multifamily. And so I joined their firm. I was there for about 4 years. And what was terrific about that is my first year with them, I was basically driving Jack, who's like, the father of the company because it's a family company. I was driving him around, kind of taking his phone calls, taking his notes. He would run meetings, and I would just scribe for him. And then he would answer any question I had. It doesn't matter how stupid, how small, how rudimentary, or if I asked it before and I'm asking him to explain it in a different way. He'd walk me through buildings and be like, hey, remember you were asking about shower pans? Look, it's a depressed slab, that gets waterproof, then the gypcrete, then you got your mortar bed. Your waterproofing is the waterproofing that goes underneath the lightweight. I'm like, thanks, Jack. That's great. That helps explain it. So I did that for him for about a year before he turned me loose on my own projects, which were multifamily, like occupied rehabs, which are extremely difficult and a pain in the ass to do. Probably why he had me do them, because they're a huge pain in the butt. Time consuming, but way less risk because you can only screw up a rehab so much. New construction, you can screw up quite bad. Rehab, the building's already there. The kitchen goes wrong, you fix it. So I did that, and then I started doing my own, ground up multifamily projects with him as a PM. And then I kind of realized, well, Jack, he's the founder of the company. His email signature says PM. His son, who's co-owner, has got PM. I've got PM. This is as far as I'm going with this group. I'm a PM, So I got to figure something else out if I want to keep excited. I felt like I was on such an incredible clip of development. right? Being there for 4 years, and I learned so much. I was doing so much, and I was networking so well in Los Angeles. But I was a project manager. I wanted to go beyond that. So I ended up getting contacted by a recruiter at some point. I just happened to be ready to jump. Recruited me over to a group called Sola Impact, which is an affordable housing developer in South Central. Now they're one of the largest development companies in all the United States, and they're the 15th largest by volume or something. And they're an affordable housing developer, mainly centered around South Central. When I joined Sola Impact, they didn't have any new construction infrastructure at all. They were all rehab, right? They hired me on to PM their ground up new construction effort in their new real estate platform. And so I show up there and I got handed a roll of drawings, and it was like, hey, this is being submitted to plan check next week. Please build it. And that was it. No systems beyond that. No cost control systems, no contracts, no templatized anything. It was just 11 by 17 set of drawings, 28 unit building in South Central. Please build this.
That's pretty great,
and by
man.
the way, our budget is impossibly skinny. You can't spend more than X dollars. And I'd never seen that kind of money get spent on a building, because all my affordable work I had done with AMJ was all not for profit, right? It's all nonprofit work, which also means kind of expensive, right? And so this for-profit work had to be really skinny, because the skinnier you can build a building, the larger your return to the investors are, right? Of course. And it being affordable, the rents per door are fixed. So your rents per door are fixed, only cost changes the return, right? And so how do we shrink that as much as possible? Luckily, with my experience from AMJ, I was very good at creating a value engineering list. Value engineering is just taking a system and finding its equivalent in performance at a lower cost, right? Some people think value engineering is like scope cancellation. That's not. That's just scope cancellation. How do you change products that equal the same performance at a lower cost, right? But I'm not above scope cancellation. I 100% have done that to get costs down, but it's not true VE.
Yeah,
So
great call out.
List.
Yeah.
I had this laundry list of, like, a dream list of VE that I kind of developed with these affordable guys that I try to implement on affordable projects. But if their budgets get too small, well, their awards become smaller. They don't want that, So it's kind of a perverse incentive with those groups. But it's a whole separate barrel of monkeys, right? And so I had this laundry list of VEs, and I just said, all right, guys, who do I contact when I'm at Solar Impact? Who do I talk to about changing the design and engineering of the buildings? And they kind of looked at themselves and like, well, you just build it. What are you talking about? Just build the fucking job. And I was like, oh man, I was a dog off his leash.
Yeah.
I took a hatchet to the drawings, get rid of this, get rid of that, change that, do this. We're going to manipulate, standardize the bathrooms this way. No tile. We're doing fiber care tub surrounds. We're doing, just tore apart the spec, built a new spec. And then over the course of 6 months, I became their senior project manager. 6 months after that, I was the associate director of construction. 6 months after that, I was the director of construction, managing the entire portfolio of ground up effort. Right. And so at the time I joined the company, it was 5 buildings being built. And by the time I left the company, it was 20 buildings actively under construction.
Wow. That's amazing, man.
And it was, again, such an effort. It was a massive lift, and I loved it the entire time.
Yeah.
It was a dog on a bone, just executing. When I had the reins in my hands to execute, we were killing it. You know what I mean? Just knocking it out of the park. Costs were down. Schedule suffered with COVID, of course, but it's just managing how much you suffer. COVID killed a lot of developers, right? Killed a lot of projects.
Right.
Delay costs alone are massive. But it depends on how well you can negotiate with the builders. Lost revenue is lost revenue. Lost rent's lost rent. You can never get that back if you lose time. But you can save on extended general conditions through the power of negotiation. And so how do you mitigate that? So worked through quite a lot, scaled that team up. Then I got to a point where I'm the director of construction. There was talk about senior director of construction, but it's really kind of the same role and no additional responsibilities. And I still had a team above me that are very comfortable. They're not going anywhere. So for me to become the number one in construction, not new construction, but all of construction, I'd have to make a jump, right? Of course. So I ended up joining EOK Development, and they're a group that does multifamily in Los Angeles. Fewer jobs, but much larger jobs. Right? and they do a lot of co-living product. Not all, but a lot of co-living product. And so I joined them as the managing director of construction. And so I deploy and oversee every bit of the construction effort and a lot of the development effort also. For instance, if you were to go into acquisitions on a property, Adam, you would ask me to assist you with your due diligence because you may or may not know how to read a soils report.
Mm-hmm.
I can read a soils report. I know the cost implications of what the findings are in the soils report, so I can help determine if it's a good or a bad buy or what additional contingencies we can have on a property right before we acquire it. So that's what I'm doing now. Who I'm doing it with.
That's amazing, man. I love the progression of your story, the way that you, took to learning, really technical up, right? I mean, that architecture background, no doubt, has a significant impact in terms of your ability to, make decisions and understand, what you're looking at. I mean, the example you brought up with getting into solo, right? And you were able to take those plans and literally just hack it away to create more value in that project. So that's an awesome story, man. Congratulations on the overall
While
growth.
never compromising on quality. All those buildings are the best quality projects you'll find in affordable housing.
That's
All
awesome.
the tenants if you were to go through a South Central Section 8 property, it would break your heart. If you really want to like sober up and see, the dark side of humanity, you tour Section 8 buildings for sale in South Central.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like it's incredible how some people are made to live, how they choose to live, how they're forced to live, however you want to frame it. But then if you go look at a Solar Impact building, which has the same tenants, the same Section 8 base, and their quality of life is so much higher. Right.
That's
These
awesome.
are real legitimate buildings with real legitimate finishes and building systems, and they're well maintained. Not to be a commercial for solar or anything, but the product that we managed to build, the cost we managed to build it out is really remarkable.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing, man. That's really awesome. So before we,
it's also attractive to ELK because ELK is like, can you bring those costs here? Because I would love to control costs, and when I walk the buildings while interviewing with the owner of ELK, he's like, what do you see in my buildings? And I'm like, man, I see some copper in the plumbing. I see recessed cans that should be puck lights. I see HVAC, condenser units that should be, not suspended on these little suspension systems. That should probably be a wall mount fan coil unit, And so for me, decision making in building is always tying what's the expense, what does it cost versus how much rent is it generating for you. If the expense gets more rent, it's worth it. If the expense is just behind the wall and no one gains any benefit, why on earth would you pay for it? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
100%.
That's awesome. That's really amazing, man. So before we close out the professional side of things, I want to plug in Translatable Skills, and I know you actually mentioned a few really awesome ones, but want to give it a highlight right now. Military to profession, translatable skill sets.
There was a confidence I gained in the Marine Corps that I don't think you can get anywhere else. Right? There's a helpful ego and there's a destructive ego that you can get just in life. And I think I developed a really healthy professional ego that compels a confidence to make a decision and not second guess the decision. If I know something is correct, if I know it serves the benefit, I will dig my heels in and I will not let it go. Right. But if I am unsure about something, if I'm not an expert in it, I'm super flexible and I'm more than willing to learn.
Right.
If there's someone that I believe is more of an expert than I am, smarter than I am, more capable than I am, I want to learn from that person and take what they know and incorporate it into my toolbox. And if someone's not, I know what I'm talking about and this person is wrong, I will twist the fabric of reality to get you to understand that you are wrong. And I will not implement whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I do think that is 100% from being a corporal of Marines. 100%. It's the only way to get anything done is, leadership. The Marine Corps is very silly about confidence, I thought, when I was in. And then when I'm out, I realized there's so much wisdom in everything they do. Right? Like in the Marine Corps, if you were to go to a meritorious promotion board, right? They teach you when you walk up to the door, you've got to break the door down. You got to smash it, right? When you're knocking on the door, you don't come in hi, Corporal, George here, trying to get a promotion. You don't do that. You knock the door down. Why is that? It's the show. Can you get out of yourself? Can you be big? Can you be seen? Can you be on a stage? Can you be in charge? Can you be the guy in the room people look to? You know what I mean? If you're little, if you're like, excuse me, you're not that guy. You're not that guy. You might be smarter. You might be more qualified. You might have the better idea. But if you're little and not saying it and keeping it to yourself, I'm like, well, what use is that to the team? Get out there. This is what I think, And so taking that from the Marine Corps to my professional life, I think has served. It has embarrassed me a couple times when I'm out there like, hey, this is it. And someone's like, George, clearly it's not. And I'm like, oh, shit. Like that's absolutely happened. Yeah, that's the risk. That's why people don't want to do it. They have to suffer that, But if you're careful, about the way you do it, and you ensure that you know what you're doing, therefore you act that way, it could really serve to your benefit. It served to my benefit. It's really just it's confidence and competence. I really took that from the Marine.
That's awesome, man. But to be fair, the way I translated that, if you do something wrong, or if you are wrong, whatever, even if you come, showing confidence, generally speaking, you keep mentioning the, ability or awareness to, adjust or, be willing to ask, right? So I would suggest that still plays into the concept you just mentioned, which means it's all the more so important to, pull that from your service and implement it.
100%. That's that healthy ego, right? I have ego. Ego compels me to do those things. But if I were to say something and you were to counter it and you were clearly correct, an unhealthy ego would shout you down regardless.
Right.
Would be hesitant to learn. I'm smart and you're dumb. I'm right and you're wrong. I can't not learn from you because I'm better than you. That's an unhealthy ego, And so I think just me being so anxious about being incorrect led me to form a healthier ego, being more open to learning, so it's kind of a strange combination, but it's led to some very good things.
Yeah. Well said, man. That's awesome. So to close out our professional side of the conversation, I want to give you a plug for any career win or wins.
So there's 100 little things, I guess, I could say about career wins when it comes to either like position or title or money or assets or buildings that you build. When you get like a TCO, the temporary certificate of occupancy, huge win, right? I built a building. It's going to be there for 50, 100, 150 years, whatever it is, right? So that's awesome. But I'd say that the biggest career win has to be going to a ribbon cutting of a building and seeing the tenants that move into your building, especially with building affordable housing, right? When you're building affordable or attainable housing, the types of people that move into your buildings that very well may have been sleeping in their car the night prior, they're couch surfing, right? The most typical Section 8 tenant that leases in Section 8 in South Central is a single mom, either escaping domestic violence or experiencing homelessness. It's one of those two things, a lot of times both. That's the most typical tenant. So when you see those people move into the building you built, flick on that AC, turn on the lights, wash their hands with that warm water, and you provided all those systems in a cost-efficient way to where you can build another building. Because I had this down to a science, man, with Sola, with like how much things cost. And I know I can build one apartment unit, one door for a one-bedroom building for about $150,000. That's how much it costs to build. So if you make a mistake on a building, $1,000 mistake on 150 units, that is one family that can't be housed, right? Due to your lack of attention to detail or carelessness or whatever it is, whatever you attribute it to. If you save $1,000 on 150 units, that's one more family that gets housed, right? That has to be my biggest career win. Seeing people get housed. That's been the most rewarding thing about being in construction, I think. Having a tangible product that gets built. People move into it. That's terrific. I'm sure if you ask a property manager, they'll say, "Man, those tenants call me and they fucking bother me all day." That's their problem. I build it, I see them move in, and I'm off to the next one.
To each their own, man. I mean, that's a very valid, very rewarding, and amazing career win. Yeah, that I appreciated that very much. Potentially that property manager doesn't, but leave them aside. All right, man. Last but not least, final two questions of the show. Start with wellness practice. What does that look like or mean for you?
Man, so I used to have a pretty robust wellness practice so my wife, we got married in 2018. She was at the time an RN, so she would have 3 days on, like 4 days off, and her days would be 12-hour days. When she got home, she wanted nothing to do with me. She wanted to, sleep for the next shift.
Yeah.
So I'd have a ton of time to myself. I'd go to the gym, you go to the beach, you're hanging out with your buddies, good time to decompress. Now she's a nurse practitioner, and she works like a regular office job, like a 9 to 5, dealing with kids with behavioral health issues, like a lot of autism and autism screenings, things like that. But she'll come home regular time. We had our first daughter, Rylan, March 20th, 2020. So the day that everything shut down.
Wow.
My wife's in labor. I'm the last or the second to last partner that was able to enter the hospital with my wife.
Wow.
After that, we heard commotions outside in the hallway. They weren't allowing partners in, just women by themselves with masks on to give birth. And my wife's laying there having labor pains, and nurses are running around doing stuff. And I'm on the phone with contractors like, you do not step foot off site. Don't let them fucking sue you. You got to work. I will get you whatever the permits are. I'll get them. If there's a fine, I'll pay it. You don't leave the job site, because the world was shutting down.
Right.
And so from that point on, we had our daughter, and it was like the world changed. And I really have not been super rigorous about the gym since, because I filled that time with all sorts of other stuff. And now I really struggle for the gym. And I would say now what my wife will do, because I'm a very, social personality. I love being with people. I love chopping it up. I love doing stuff, but I also need time alone by myself, quiet, and decompress. I just have to have it. And when you have kids, it's really kind of a selfish thing. It's like, how can you ask your wife or partner to give you that when they also might want the same thing? So luckily, her parents are still in Marietta, so she'll take the kids down to their house for like a night. She'll get time off because grandma and grandpa are with the kids. So then I'll stay up here and I'll have like my quiet time. And so like once every month or two, that will happen. And that's been very good, So I know wellness can mean a lot of things, but for me, it's really like a quiet time to get centered, because I feel like I'm like a nitro motor. When I burn hot and I go hard, but my motor only lasts so long, and I got like a cool off period that I got to build up for the next burn. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that 100% plays, 100% tracks. And, I would say it's good that you even recognize that, because I think a lot of people don't recognize the fact that they just need a moment, a day, a night, whatever, an hour to just, be by themselves and decompress. And then they'll burn themselves out, or just, be angry, right? Be agitated. So that's
what I learned, was burning myself out. Every either good decision or good habit that I've formed or good trait isn't formed out of, some great wisdom. It's because I did it wrong, and I broke my nose from stepping on the rake, and I'm just doing my best to avoid the rakes,
Yeah. That's awesome that you're learning from that. That's really important. Awesome, man. So last but not least, favorite book or books that you'd like to recommend? I know you mentioned a few, so you can plug those in again.
It's just, if I had to give to someone who was like me, who was smart but ignorant, starting a life's journey or looking to do something big, I would read Rich Dad Poor Dad first, and then I would read Extreme Ownership. Those are the two books I'd recommend. And I know that's like basic. Everyone's like, well, I've already read those books. It's like, well, you're not who I'm talking to. You know what I mean? I'm talking to the kid in the barracks room who's trying to figure out his next move. Maybe he doesn't know, what to do next. Rich Dad Poor Dad taught me a lot about there's other ways to live life instead of going to work 9 to 5, get paid for your time. Because when you stop going to work, you stop getting paid. So how do you free yourself? How do you escape the matrix, as you will, right?
Yeah.
And then Extreme Ownership really put to words a lot of stuff that I kind of felt that I wasn't sure. My conviction was kind of mixed in how I felt about things, because I grew up in a family that was very much, if you work hard, good things will happen. And I'm like, well, mom and dad, you guys don't have any fucking money. You guys work hard. What are you talking about? One of my first jobs in high school was working at Dollar Tree in Marietta. And that was an extremely hard job. And it paid very little. And I'm like, wait a minute. The relationship between working hard and making money, that's not a one-to-one relationship. I'm working my ass off and I'm not making any money, And so extreme ownership, I think, combined with Rich Dad Poor Dad shows you that, there's other ways to live life and only you can make it happen. You can't rely on outside forces. If something's going wrong, it's you. And if something's going right, it's also you. And if something goes wrong in the future, how best to respond to it, how best to own it, how best to kind of twist it in your favor,
Yeah. Well said, man. Those are amazing book recommendations. George, thanks so much, man, for taking the time to share your story, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate you having me, man.
Awesome. To our subscribers, thank you for subscribing. Our listeners, a reminder to please subscribe to our channels, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. A shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build, and we will see y'all soon. Take care. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.